Hi everyone, welcome. I'm out here in my backyard. As you can see, I'm in the autumn spirit with my own little Halloween decoration. And you can see that the leaves are also decorating my yard because they're all out here in various colors. But we're not out here to look at the autumn leaves or the change of colors. We're out here to check on my outdoor worm bed. Well, I don't even know what to call it. I always impulsively want to call it my outdoor worm bin because I typically run worms in bins. This is really a worm bag. It's a couple grow bags, and then the container next to it is where the worms that live in there came from. That's just my everyday compost barrel, kitchen scraps, everything goes in there except for the select few things that I put aside for this particular population of worms that lives in here. So we're going to get in here, see how it's doing as far as the feeding that it got last time 10 days ago, see how it's holding up, and then we'll probably get another portion today. So I'm going to put on a glove and let's get to work. So my original plan was to feed these guys with stuff out of my freezer, and then it occurred to me that I had this bag of fruit in the outside refrigerator, in the garage refrigerator, and it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind. But this stuff has been sitting out there for such a long time that I can't even remember. And it's, I don't know if it's coming through on the camera, but it's clear that one of these pieces of fruit resting in this bag right here has already transformed into liquid. So this one little plastic bag in here is preventing catastrophe, having all that fluid spew out everywhere. I don't think they're going to get all of this today. I'm going to just kind of pick and choose what they get, perhaps about half. None of this is frozen, but there's just so much of it here that it makes sense to use this for today's feeding. All kinds of yummy fruits. A nice little jolt of sugar for these little guys today. Here we've got a nice close-up look of the stuff that's already growing on some of this fruit. Now the other nice thing I did here was I captured all the fluid that was sitting in these two bags and I put it in here. What I'm going to end up using that for is to sort of feed all the microbes and bacteria, fungi, everything that sits in my ready-made bedding collection, which is right here on the standby. So I've got all this dampened cardboard, paper, shreds, some leaves mixed in. There was already some finished castings placed in here just to introduce that microscopic life into the bin, but I think adding drippings out of a whole bunch of broken down and decomposing fruit is going to really give the life in that collection of material a real jolt. So we got all these little creepy crawlies, stuff that I was seeing a whole lot of down in my wormery, but less and less lately, but they're still out here in numbers, evidently. Here, you know, I shouldn't worry too much about them, let them be. When I see them downstairs though in my wormery, I do attempt to eradicate them. So I'd rather not have them down there. Who knows what they're going to turn into or what kind of trouble they can cause. So we've got a pretty good sized ditch that developed down in here. And I could already see a worm just chilling out over here at the edge of the pit. This is where the feeding was placed. Pretty good, healthy feeding. Very sizable one 10 days ago. And 10 days prior to that, yet another fairly large feeding. And I guess, you know, what you saw there, those two bags of fruit, plus some coffee that I bought out here from inside, that's going to be their feeding today. Perhaps not quite as large as the past couple feedings, but still a pretty generous portion for these little guys. These little guys do a really wonderful job breaking stuff down. Every time we come in here, we have trouble finding leftovers of what they'd been given previously. And last time, too, with a 10-day interval between our check-ins, it seemed like enough time for this population to work through a good size feeding without too much trouble. So, yeah, we're getting down into where the food had last been placed. We could see a lot of worms still congregating in this stuff, and I could feel material. That's usually what it is. It's usually just bedding that you're going to bump into in a case like this. Leftover bedding from the last feeding that soaked in all the juices of all the food that had been placed in here, but after 10 days I would think that all the vegetable stems and stuff that had been put in here last time. All stuff that came out of the freezer, so as that stuff thawed, it almost like probably immediately became nice and soft and easy to eat for these little guys. So I got a feeling the actual food has been gone for a while, but all the juice-soaked bedding that surrounded the food is really what the worms seem to enjoy the most. So we've created a pretty good sized hole that we could drop today's feeding into. I'm glad I bought out my entire stash of pre-made bedding, because last time I only bought up a little tray's worth of it, a couple handfuls of it, so I wasn't able to use quite as liberal a quantity during the last feeding as I would normally like to. I think I equated last time's bedding portion to about 2 handfuls, but I'll usually probably go with 3 or 4 handfuls today, because we do have plenty of room in this bin. I gotta remind myself how big this bin is. Actually, the other day I came over here right after it had rained, and I grabbed hold of the handles, gave this thing a lift, and I had a hard time lifting this thing up. It's so heavy, and it's big. I mean, it's probably twice as deep as the containers I'm used to working in down in my basement. So it's a much larger system than I'm used to working in. Luckily, it's got a good enough population in it to be just as productive as any other bin, because there's a huge number of worms living in here. So here we've got a good little space that we can start establishing today's feeding in. Make a little bit of room in the pre-made bedding box so that we could throw in some fresh materials and then jack it up with some of that juice that flowed out of those fruits. So that was already a couple handfuls of bedding, but we're going to use more afterwards. So let's get the feeding in here. Stuff is pretty gross. So we'll just let it drop out. Even though I collected a whole bunch of the fluid that's in these bags, I could tell that there's still a lot remaining. So I'm wondering if maybe the only way to get this stuff out is to sort of squeeze it out of the bag. Make sure it's all accounted for. Get these labels out of here too while we're at it, right? There's probably others. This does seem like the right time to eliminate them rather than letting them blend in. This looks like just a scrap of paper, piece of bedding or something. That stuff can stay. That'll break down, but those stickers are usually plastic or something like that. Also got a little bit of this crushed eggshell here. I was actually planning on just using the last of this here in today's feeding, so we'll be real generous with that. We'll keep piling that stuff in, because what the heck, let them have it, right? That was about half of the coffee I bought out here. We'll give the rest of it to them on a top layer somewhere. And now we can actually go with maybe another handful of this stuff. We've still got a whole other bag full of really nasty fruits here. Okay, here, not so much stuff getting caught up in the plastic. I thought I saw labels here too, so let's see if we can get rid of those as long as we're here. Gosh, this piece of fruit's bringing all kinds of goodies with it into the bin. This should be a popular item. Alright, I don't know what happened. I'm pretty sure I saw a label. And you know what? I wonder if I should just pull these out of here too. You know what? Let them go. We'll see what happens with them. Chances are they'll be in the material still when the material is all just castings and ready to be harvested, and those will just be sitting in there. But let's utilize the last of this crushed eggshell. Yeah, that was a lot. But I just want to be done with that little portion that I had set aside, and all that really remains is the remainder of this coffee. That's a pretty good size feeding, and I think I only used up about half of what was in that bag originally. There's a whole bunch of kiwi and apple, which is in just, you know, pretty good shape as far as comparing it to what you saw here, because this stuff was in really bad shape. But that other stuff, even though it might be kind of dry and nasty, you know, from a human consumption point of view, it's going to make for a great worm food. So it's going into the freezer. So yes, as promised, I was real generous with the bedding. I don't even know, I kind of lost track. There must have been a good 6 or 7 handfuls there. Because, you know, I think with this type of food's going to just continue to break down, turn into sort of a fluid and a liquid, and having all this stuff nearby to soak that in, I think helps a lot. That's all nice stuff that the worms are probably going to really enjoy hanging out in. Here's a little piece of potato, which goes back to not the last feeding or the previous feeding, but 3 feedings ago. A whole bunch of raw potato I put in here. Someday it'll break down. At this point, I guess if I encounter this stuff, it probably wouldn't hurt for me to start chipping it into little pieces to help with that breakdown process, because there is a bunch of it in here. But, you know, let's not waste our time with that. It'll be interesting to see how that stuff breaks down on its own, but if we do encounter some of it here and there, we can help it out. How does that sound? Alright, we'll start bringing in these materials that we piled up on the outer edges. It's always fun too, because a lot of the material was bought up with worms in it, and they just stayed right there in what was surrounding them. This is the husk of a black soldier fly larva, which looks like it's already transformed into a fly. Kind of like their skin turns into just a little bit of a cocoon in a way or something, and then the fly itself ends up creeping out of there. So we gave this whole bin a good aeration by going right down the middle and digging it all out. And to me it also seems like just by being in a bag, the material itself that the bag is made of seems to allow for a good amount of airflow too, because I don't know, the worms always just seem so active, so full of life and energy. I assume it's because they're getting a good steady flow of air, oxygen, making its way through this real bedding rich material, coming in from the sides I believe too, through the bag. And here's another label. Let's get rid of it. So I'm not sure if that's really the explanation for it, but I'm sure it probably helps contribute to the overall success of these outdoor bins, because they always seem to run so nicely. I don't know if that's like maybe what the potato should look like at this point, kind of rotting away and getting soft and mushy, but most of it still seems kind of crisp and fresh. So hopefully it'll start to break down soon. This is feeding number 10 for this bin, and it's only about maybe 80 some odd, maybe 90 some odd days old. I can't remember the exact age. I'll probably include its age in the name of the video. But I don't know how, you know, over that many feedings, I don't know how I ended up with such a massive container with so much stuff in it. So maybe just by being outside, I treated it as having a lot more capacity or something. Maybe I just use lots more bedding out here than I typically do downstairs. But somehow the volume, just the overall size of this setup is so huge. Or at least, you know, huge relative to what I'm used to downstairs. A lot of people that run much larger systems would be like, that's not huge. I'm just speaking relative to what I'm used to using, which are little bus box type plastic trays. So these are these grow bags do seem to be somewhat larger in capacity, and I think in the end it's really the weight. I can really tell that this is a heck of a big system just from its weight, because it's so heavy. All right, everyone, that's pretty much it for today's check-in on our outdoor worm bag system. The feeding that they got today, I got a feeling that, you know, heavily broken down fruits, chock full of delicious sugars and juices, that stuff's not going to last very long at all. So if we were to come back in here a week from now, we'd probably find a good amount of leftover bedding from today's feeding, but I would not be expecting to find any leftover chunks of fruit other than those pits from those peaches. Alright everyone, that's it for today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.